Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Matt Marshall.
All right, welcome back from the breakouts. I hope you had a good time. So we had a little bit of a transition snafu. We weren't necessarily clear as we should have been on the board. So in the next two sessions, we will be very clear first here where the breakouts are going to happen on this screen, and then we're going to have someone in front of the elevator, again, reiterating where you should go for your sessions, because there's two sessions across the street. So hopefully next time you'll be able to know more seamlessly where to go. But there's two sessions across the street, one up here and then two down there, just as a reminder. And as another reminder, those are the bread and butter of the event. So we'd love your feedback. So if your voice wasn't heard in this session, or even if it was, we want to make sure that we are collecting your input, also your commitments, right? So for example, if you're a regional development executive from a region thinking about how to draw in investment, tell us what your commitment is and how we can help. Bring the community to bear to help you. Is it starting an accelerator? Is it launching a seed fund? Whatever it is, attracting a large company, defining what the industry is. As I mentioned, VentureBeat itself wants to help and actually get involved, and we're going to be talking about that at the end of this afternoon, how we can contribute, what sort of cities are interested in tech transformation that's related to what we write about, so that we can actually help form an event around that community. So we're also part of that. We want to track that, and we will keep those commitments confidential. We won't publish it on VentureBeat, just in case there was a question. We do publish a lot of information, but we'll help keep confidence until we agree with you that it's worth publishing. And an email to send it to is Lauren@VentureBeat. You can send it to me as well, mmarshall@VentureBeat. Lauren@VentureBeat is helping collect a lot of the data for tomorrow. So that's Lauren, Lauren, @venturebeat.com. So without further ado, let's get started with the next session. So it's my pleasure to introduce the entrepreneur in residence at Techstars, Chris Hively, and the senior fellow and policy director of Brookings Institute, Mark Murrow, both of whom have done really impressive work, both on the Brookings side for research and AI and all those implications across the nation and so on. And then and Chris, kind of more anecdotally for Techstars, going to all the regions and collecting a lot of information about what regional strengths there are. So it's going to be a great conversation. Welcome. Thank you. Oh, and then Anna's going to be moderating.
Oh, and Anna.
Yeah. Last but not least.
Good to see you.
Yeah, Mark.
How you doing?
Thanks. Yeah.
Pete. Okay.
So I would just like to echo, what Matt has said. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm the editor of the Heartland Tech section at VentureBeat, so this is very near and dear to my heart, and it's nice to meet people I've interviewed or emailed in person. Like Mark, I just met in person for the first time today, and we've talked on the phone like 5 times at least. So for reference, Mark is policy director at the Brookings Institution. Like Matt said, Chris is entrepreneur in residence at Techstars. So Mark, I'd like to start with you first. As we've mentioned, obviously Silicon Valley is still the center of tech, but people in these ecosystems can feel that there's activity bubbling up. So what trends are you seeing geographically in how tech is dispersing or not dispersing?
Sure. So thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for attending. This is a conversation some of us have been watching grow in force for a few years, so it's gratifying to see you all. Thanks to VentureBeat. I lead a bunch of tech and economy and analysis work at Brookings. We have a particular angle on this. We don't think we really have a national tech economy. We have a networked set of local, bottom-up, connected ecosystems. And I think you guys are testimony to that. So I'm all about the geography of the economy. I think it matters where things are. And so what are we seeing? I think we're seeing a real interplay of two things I call divergence and convergence at the same time. And I'm just going to set the context. I think some of these things are headwinds for us. Some of the new work I've been doing has been showing some of the polarizing effects, the widening of differences. Right after the election, we looked at the deep divisions. If you look at, basically the blue America is a very small but very economically powerful set of places. And red America, very different. So there's a high output and low output dynamic. We've also seen incredible changes in growth. Still, big places growing much faster. And really, to an extent, tech to date has rewarded big. And I think it's changed the geography of the country. And so far, though, that is a huge factor. 93% of population growth since 2010 has been in big places, meaning over 1 million, 3/4 of employment growth. So I'm just saying these are some of the dynamics we're up against in a way. And then the tech economy itself has concentrated. We just were checking this in the last 2 days. We show that the Bay Area and about 10 other metros have commandeered larger and larger shares, something like 40% of all growth. So that's a headwind. Tech inherently favors some of these big places, but there's a lot of other things going on. We've confirmed that 94 of the largest 100 metros and hundreds of other ones are all adding significant tech growth. So that's a baseline, win behind us. We've also been tracking what we're calling the rise of mid-tech, which are technology work and entrepreneurial work that is not in the absolute vanguard, cutting edge, only can be done in a few places, but is about building out the overall system. Many of these jobs don't require a bachelor's. Significant growth in places like Columbus, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Kansas City, Detroit, Nashville, Indiana. Growing pools of talent, often tied or surrounding a research university, but that's not necessary, and really adding a real pool of talent for the spread of this economy. So we think there's a lot of opportunity in the region, even as, make no mistake about it, tech is still dominated by these big guys. And meanwhile, there's entrepreneurship spreading in all kinds of fields beyond that. So.
Right. So it sounds like there's an opportunity to create a tech ecosystem that's different from some of these bigger hubs.
I think lock-in is a possible very bad future for U.S. tech. Mm-hmm. And this spread of a divergent, bottom-up, locally distributed, unique set of other ecosystems in which it's not just tech per se, it's really everything as it interacts with digital. That's the special thing. And I think digital is unleashing this whole distributed, bottom-up set of ecosystems. I think the ecosystem world might not have really come to fruition absent tech.
Yeah. So Chris, you're with Techstars right now, but you are a serial entrepreneur. You are still involved with the Raleigh-Durham ecosystem. I'm curious how you feel like the conversation about what it takes to build a startup ecosystem has changed, since you first started.
Well, sure. I think like most of you out there, the conversations 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 6 years ago were kind of stilted, like, hey, can I find someone who wants to talk about this, right?
And now they're here.
And now we're all here, yeah. Yay us, right? So I think it's matured starting from zero and us a lot of figuring out kind of how this happens. I think the thing, obviously as an entrepreneur, I'm biased towards entrepreneurs, but the one thing that I would remind everyone is that as ecosystems, as communities start to grow, or at whichever kind of phase in this maturity you are, it's still all about entrepreneurs. And it may seem like a trite statement, but I say no entrepreneurs, no entrepreneurial community. And sometimes we forget that. And so my focus and the thing I remind all the people I work with is we always have to consistently put the entrepreneur and their needs in the middle. And as we can continue to help and grow entrepreneurs, community grows around that, and hopefully great things happen. So.
Yeah. So do you have any advice as to how we can kind of center this conversation to make sure that entrepreneurs are always at the center of what it takes to build this ecosystem?
Well, it's actually very, very simple. Whenever you're sitting there with a choice into how you want to act, ask yourself which choice would be best for the entrepreneur. And you consistently do that over and over again, not necessarily what's best for you, not what's best for your business or your organization. How will this help that entrepreneur get farther, or help connect that entrepreneur to the resources they need, or help inspire more entrepreneurs? And I think just that dialogue I continue to put that in my head every day, because we sometimes, as humans get caught up in we have that single lens of what's good for us, right? We all enjoy that. But let's think about the entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. And so with your role at Techstars, I think you said last year you traveled to 55 different cities, meeting with entrepreneurs there. So tell us a little bit about what you do when you get into a community and how you help them come up with like a playbook of sorts.
Yeah, so the work that we started last year working with Techstars, we're a worldwide organization best known for our accelerator programs, now up to 41 programs in 30 cities around the world. That's 400 plus investments every year. We also run the organization that runs Startup Weekends, which there was just slightly less than 1,000 throughout the world. So do the math on that. That means there's a lot of Startup Weekends happening every weekend. And I think you touch about 30,000, entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs or serial entrepreneurs who come together in 54 hours. But we thought that there was another role we could play, and as some of you may know, there's a book called Startup Communities, came out 6 years ago by Brad Feld, who's one of the co-founders of Techstars, and kind of the three of us got together and said, I think there's a way that we can help. We're not exactly sure what it is, we're not exactly sure how best to help, but let's dive in last year. And so in 2017, I visited and talked to a lot of people, a lot of you all, some of you all, and communities all over the world. And here's what we see. And what we see is that we built kind of our lens has 5 pieces to it: culture, density, talent, capital, and institutional support. I'll run those through again because I'm going to do a little trick. Culture, density, talent, capital, and institutional support. And what we find in a lot of places, and by the way, that's kind of in order of importance in my view, and what we find in a lot of places is we flip that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that we think that there needs to be a cultural underpinning of how entrepreneurs get inspired, how they connect with people in their community, find the resources they need, right? This is a kind of a fear-oriented thing, being an entrepreneur. So how does a community kind of surround you? And so typically what I find is that, and this, with all respect and very little judgment, a lot of economic development top-down approaches forget the entrepreneur and miss the culture. And so a lot of what our work and the observations we made is trying to get in and just trying to shift and create a little different mindset about putting the entrepreneur first and figuring out how the rest of us as investors, as economic developers, as government, academic, all the people that are make up the community, how they can best serve the entrepreneur.
Yeah. And Mark, in your work, do you feel like there are certain, I use the term ingredients in terms of what makes a startup community. Are there any ingredients that you feel like are kind of overrated, underrated?
I think while attraction is really important in certain cases, it's often a general goal rather than a specific goal to perhaps fill a niche or to pull in a complementary.
Do you mean attraction of new businesses?
Attraction of firms, attraction
Okay.
of businesses. And I think we've gotten way off in this country right now. Our only real, national policy right now, or our stance is to essentially applaud the Amazon competition.
Yeah.
Which I think is now fortunately Amazon's RFP actually lists a number of the right sorts of things, but I think a lot of places have interpreted this as a very outward-facing matter and not, considered some of the things that we're hearing about here. And I think that's, a real gap. And I think the history of economic development has really not been about ecosystem building. And it really...
Organic, grassroots,
Yeah, and it's
ground up.
only recently really been even about technology. So I think we're part of this whole sea change that we're in is a transition in hopefully that economic development becomes more responsive to the kind of things that Chris is talking about.
Yeah.
If I could answer that question,
Yeah.
one of the things that I observe almost across the board is kind of over-ranking capital as the key driver. Good money with bad entrepreneurs is a failure across the board. The problem is you won't see it for 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years. And so I think there's an I don't know, not a dependence, but an overthinking that more capital will help grow our community. And I think there's a lot of research that shows actually that more capital has a negative correlation to new firm development. And that's where I would really want to see more people focus is how do we tease out and inspire and give permission and provide the first 3 steps on a scary journey of being an entrepreneur to that 5 to 10% of the entrepreneurs who are in every one of our communities. I want to bring these people to the forefront and show them that there's a place and a space for them to kind of exercise their entrepreneurial dreams. And that doesn't mean just throw money at them. That means a whole lot of other things. And that's what I try to focus on.
And I would add like talent too. I mean, we've often competed on the base of hard assets when we really places need to be considering themselves as pools of entrepreneurial and technical talent. And I think that's absolutely crucial.
The last thing I wanted to ask you too, I think we have people here representing 30 different states. People are going to be comparing notes on what they're experiencing in their city or their state. What do you think of the idea of trying to replicate another city's, say they have a great accelerator program?
Don't do it.
Yeah,
Right.
but is there, how can you find inspiration in other cities or states' programs, and if so, how do you do that?
I would just say the first thing is to go local. I mean, I think we're proliferating an incredible vocabulary of actual particular tools. That's not the problem. It's really figuring out who you are, going deep, finding the passion, and especially also all of sort of the human capital side, the social capital, understanding how things connect. And don't ignore the ecosystem in the region. That is crucial. So
Yeah, so when you talk about who you are talking about, for example, the community's historical strengths, anchor institutions? What are you looking for? What should they look for?
History, right? Sense of where do you have specializations? Where do you have experiences? What is the community passionate about? What are the entrepreneurs passionate about? And then what are the strengths? And some of the conventional things. What is the university good at? Where is there a history of particular, leadership? What are the firms? So I think but it's about going deeper into the place rather than trying to go up to capture something else that's out there.
I wanted to jump on something you mentioned. I don't believe there's a playbook, and I believe every community is unique. One of the thinkings we're starting to kind of look at more kind of thinking of communities as more kind of complex adaptive systems, and one of the keys to a complex adaptive system, they liken it to raising a child. We all know that, you can apply the same parental techniques to one child versus a second, and they come up with they're two different things, right? And by the way, there's no predictability or correlation between any of your behavior and how the child, right? So people without money that are uneducated can raise great kids, and likewise, super wealthy and very connected people can raise really shitty kids, right? I obviously don't have any of those. I only have brilliant ones. But if you understand, so the idea is with this kind of complex, very non-predictable kind of things, you really have to focus on at the risk of oversimplifying, it's really understanding who you are and understanding that this is a 20-year journey. I love the slide that someone put up about Everest. One of my favorite little cliches is there's no express train to Everest, right? Like you have to go to each base camp, you have to adjust, you have to figure out where your body and the equipment and everything changes at the 4 or 5 base camps. Think of community building in that analogy, and that, yes, we have a long-term goal to kind of, and set goals, but let's figure out what we can do over the next year or two, figure out the assets, get the entrepreneurs engaged. New entrepreneurs are inspired by other entrepreneurs. They're rarely inspired by the mayor. Love all the mayors out there. Please support us. But we're inspired by other entrepreneurs. Figure out how to convene and put them together. And what I'll tell you, having witnessed this in Raleigh-Durham over the last 8 years, you just start kind of convening and pulling people together. The capital will start to take care of itself. Great entrepreneurs find capital. Good things start to happen. You'll look back 2 years, 3 years, and you're like, I can't believe how much we've accomplished. And it may not be kind of noticeable on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis, but it's all these little interactions and bringing things together from a grassroots that I believe is how you build great startup communities.
Yeah. Well, if we have time, we can take like 2 or 3 questions. Does anyone have? I'll go with you up front since you're closest.
You're going to open up Techstars out here, Rita?
No. Because I don't make that decision. That decision is made by Reno and its corporations and the people. I mean, yeah, maybe. So my community development, everyone knows what entrepreneur in residence means. It means we don't know what to call you. And can you just go kind of, troll around and figure stuff out. So my interest and why I'm sitting here is I want to help build community. One of those outcomes may be at some point, if you don't already have an accelerator, you'll do your own accelerator, or maybe it'll be a Techstars accelerator, or maybe it'll be someone else's accelerator. At some level, I don't really care because I want you to help build a great community. And a Techstars accelerator is not the only marker for success. It's just one piece of a really big puzzle.
Mm-hmm. And then, oh yeah, over here.
Can you talk a little bit about the potential multiples and timeframes for returns for the companies that come out of accelerators?
Well, you know that better than me. Plant in the audience. Yeah, why don't you tell me? So I'm not on the accelerator side. I don't run the Techstars accelerator. I ran my own accelerator for 6 years, which gave me my community building cred.
Small wins in 3 to 5 years, big wins in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Small wins in 3 to 5 years, big wins in 7 to 10 years in terms of running an accelerator. That's, by the way, if you know what you're doing. And what I'll tell you is I've become a little bit of an accelerator snob in that I've spent more years, by the way, outside the Techstars tent than inside the Techstars tent. And what I'll tell you is that the bar keeps getting higher and higher to figure out how you help entrepreneurs succeed. And so and by the way, we don't have, I'm chris.hively@techstars.com. Email me. I'll talk to anybody and snob away on if you're thinking of doing an accelerator. I just want you to do it really, really well. Mm-hmm. It's not the end all. It's not the panacea for.
Yeah. So one last question in the back.
One of the Brookings Institute research pieces that we've used is the rise in income growth in advanced industries versus non-advanced industries, and I think it's been 5x since 1975. And so as you look at one of the big challenges in our country, income disparity, it seems highly correlated to whether advanced industries either exist or don't exist. And I'm just wondering if you have any specific kind of comments on any advance in your field that related to that original Brookings insight, which is that if you don't have advanced industries, which are defined fairly broadly, I remember, Basically since 1975, wages have been flat, which I think we've seen repercussions politically across the country. So, as you look at this event here today, how do you, just some comments maybe on we're all talking about startups and entrepreneurs, but ultimately it's about people making more money and communities being economically healthier. So,
it's definitely true that advanced industries are defined as those with a high R&D content and a high STEM content, but I would actually say advanced industries are essentially ones that are being driven by digital, so that's a huge platform here. There's no doubt that those industries are performing better. They're essentially the only manufacturing that we're going to have left soon. So that is a very important core, and I think much of your entrepreneurial activity is going to be in some kind of advanced industry, though that's not essential, though. So, but I think it absolutely is. This is the core driver of many regional economies. So, and I think how entrepreneurship connects with and is located across those kinds of industries is really, really important for places.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much
Great.
to you both.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, gentlemen. Great conversation, spellbound throughout. So the next presentation is from the co-founder and executive director of the Economic Innovation Group. One of the things that, actually it's a little known, there was national legislation that helped create some opportunities on the regional level. And you just heard from Mark that we don't have a federal tech industry or national tech industry, but this is where actually the national federal level can actually do something right, but working from the regional side up. So I'd like to introduce the gentleman who's going to be giving a lightning talk on Opportunity Zones, the largest community investment program in a generation. So welcome, Steve Glickman. Steve, thanks for coming.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks to Robert and Anna and others for putting on a really great event that we've been hoping to see in the venture capital and technology space for a long time. I also really love being the speaker right before lunch because just so you know, I have a 10-minute version of this, but I also have a 2-hour version of this. And so that will all depend on the level of clapping and smiling and looking at me and giving me positive feedback. That feels like an hour-and-a-half version of this. Okay, so the organization I run is called the Economic Innovation Group, as Matt mentioned. We're a research and policy organization based in DC, and we really focus on two big things. One, how do you solve geographic inequality in America? So we focus on economic inequality from a regional or intra or intercity perspective, much more so than an income inequality perspective. And how do you get the investor community engaged in solving the problems we see happening on a national stage? We're most known for a piece of work we've done called the Distressed Communities Index. All right, that I'll talk about in a second, which I'll show you in just a second, and a piece of federal legislation that we got put into the Tax Cut and Jobs Act called the Opportunity Zone Program. These are some of our lead sponsors, our lead economists who worked with us on this over the past couple years or so. I want to give a really quick overview of how this works. I'm going to start with kind of a why this program came about, and then go through kind of the how, what, when, where of how the program works. So let me start with some why. This is a snapshot of our Distressed Communities Index. Basically what you're seeing here is a national map. As you get darker and redder, you get to places that are more distressed. As you get lighter and bluer, you get to places that are more prosperous. A lot of distress you see concentrated in the Southeast, in the Midwest. We see a lot of distress in urban cores and rural areas, a lot of prosperity in suburbia and in the West. And what does all this mean? Well, let me start with what we see as the big lie coming out of Washington. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Which one? There's so many to choose from. Well, I'm going to tell you one in particular, and it's actually on the surface doesn't seem problematic at all. It's that growth in America is going to raise all boats. That's the core lie that all economic policy in either party is built upon. And that was true 25 years ago. It is not true now. If you look at the national statistics, you think everything was going great in this country. 4% unemployment means where basically everyone has a job. 2 to 3% GDP growth is the fastest GDP growth among any industrialized country. A 25,000 point stock market, record highs, right? And yet we know that this growth in a totally different way after this recession is only going to a handful of places in the country. I'll give you a couple ways to think about that. One, if there's about 52 million Americans who live in distressed communities. Those are those dark red communities. In those communities, they've seen, these are over the recovery years, they've lost 10 to 20% of their jobs and 10 to 20% of their businesses. In those blue areas, they've gained 5 to 10% jobs and 5 to 10% businesses year over year. And that's really unusual because before the recession, what you saw was 80% of metro areas gained businesses every year on net. They raised that stock of new businesses. Right now, in the last couple years of this data, 60% of metro areas are losing businesses year over year. 80% creation to 60% losing it. And where it's happening is also increasingly concentrated. So we're, of course, on this 30-year decline of business creation, but where we are creating jobs and businesses are even more concentrated than it's ever been. So 5 US metro areas, Miami, New York, Dallas, Houston, LA, account for the same amount of net growth of businesses as the rest of the country combined. 5 cities versus everywhere else. So the economy in this country is really one of 2 countries. And the impact is huge. If you're in a distressed area, you're gonna die 5 years earlier. You're gonna be 60, 70% more likely to have diabetes, to commit suicide, to be obese. And you're much less likely to be part of the American dream. So there's a study we've done with Raj Chetty, a great economist, who we look at the percentage likelihood that you're going to achieve the American dream if you're poor in a prosperous county or poor in a distressed one. If you're poor in a distressed county, 1 in 10 people who grow up poor will raise their socioeconomic level. If you're poor in a prosperous county, 3 out of 4 people who grow up that way will rise the socioeconomic change. So place matters. We're very much with Mark Murrow here. But we also think very much that capital matters. And capital matters because the source of all job creation really in this country comes from businesses that scale. And we know where businesses are growing. We also know where capital is going. 75% of venture capital goes to 3 states, New York, California, Massachusetts. In the years since the recovery, there's been a tremendous slowdown in the concentration of where banks are. Big mergers in the banking industry. Bank of America shut down 10,000 of its branches over the last 10 years. We used to produce 100 or more new banks every year. Now we basically produce 0. So no debt capital, no high growth venture capital. The banks that do lend at a 20-year lows to small businesses across the country. And so we as an organization took upon the challenge to how to solve that problem. And for us, solving that problem was to systematize, to make it systemic, how investors viewed a bigger part of the country, because it wasn't happening on its own. And that leads us into the creation of opportunity zones. And opportunity zones essentially are tapping into one huge resource the US has, capital gains. We don't have a shortage of capital in this country, we just have a lack of diversity of where that capital goes. So as of the end of 2017, there are roughly $6 trillion with a T dollars in unrealized capital gains sitting with individual and corporate investors in the US. About $4 trillion individual, about $2 trillion corporate. That's way more than the scale of capital that we spend a lot of time talking about that corporations have overseas that they're trying to bring back here. That's around $2 trillion. You have 3 times more sitting among investors that are already invested in the US. And how the program works is if you're one of those investors with capital gains and you reinvest your capital into low-income communities, you get a series of tax incentives. You have to invest them through private funds called opportunity funds. And the only thing to know about those opportunity funds is that they have to invest 90% of their capital in low-income communities, which I'll talk to you about in a second, in these opportunity zones. So opportunity zones are just made up of low-income communities in every state across the country. If you invest in these funds, you get 3 incentives. One, let's say you own $1 million of Apple stock, which I do not, but I wish I did, and you sold that stock. you pay the capital gains on it for the year you sold it. Well, if you roll it over into one of these opportunity funds, you don't pay that capital gains tax for 9 years. On top of that, if you held it for at least 5 or 7 years, you get a 10 to 15% discount in that original tax bill. But that's not even the big part of the incentive. The big part of the incentive is if you invest your rolled over gains into a fund and you hold it for 10 years, and let's say that $1 million in Apple stock is invested in a fund that invests in a piece of real estate or an incubator or a bunch of companies, and those are valued at $5 million. You have $4 million in new gains, you hold it for 10 years, tax-free. You pay no new taxes. Now, you may think, what's the catch? There's no catch. This is an incentive that applies to every single investor in this country. It's a private market-based solution. The government's not involved in either assigning credits or picking projects, but there is a role for government here on the local level. So this will get to the where. The governors in every state right now have until March 21st, or if they get an extension to April 20th, to pick the opportunity zones in their state. They get to pick 25% of their low-income communities. If you think low-income communities, that seems like a pretty small amount of the country. 40% of the country is a low-income community. In Reno, this area is a low-income community. Virtually the whole city of Reno is a low-income community. Virtually the whole city of Baltimore, virtually the whole city of Detroit, of Cincinnati. Most rural areas all over the country are low-income. The governor has to down select. They get to pick 25% of these, but these are huge chunks of the country that will qualify for these zones, and they're making the decisions right now. What can you invest in these zones? Basically anything. You can invest in real estate. You can invest in manufacturing rehabs. You can invest in infrastructure. You can invest in new businesses. You can invest in existing businesses. There's a limited set of things you can invest in. You can't invest in fund of funds. You can't invest in financial institutions. And this is, I know, going to hurt Nevada. You can't invest in sin businesses. That was a specifically anti-Nevada clause that we put in because we hate it here. No, I'm just kidding. This is how my parents live in Las Vegas, so I love it here. But there's a set of businesses on the books that survive year after year you can't invest in. Those are like casinos and golf clubs, which was an anti-Trump provision. I'm just kidding again. It just happened to be part of the rules. Massage parlors and other things. If you stay away from that, you can invest in just about anything you want in this country. This program is ultimately eminently scalable. There are no caps. You can have a fund that's $10 billion. You can invest in assets that are anywhere on that spectrum, from $1 to as many billions as you want. Because this is not a program where the government's assigning tax credits, where the investors are taking the risk, where the incentive is on the back end, there's no cap to how the program works. And last thing I'll point out is the question of when is this happening? So it's happening right now. So the selections are being made in the next 2 to 6 weeks. The funds are going to be the certification for the funds, which are just, again, that you have a private sector vehicle investing in these zones, will be stood up by this summer. You can start raising capital at the end of this year. You can start deploying it as soon as those funds are together. There are a few rules that Treasury are going to write into this program that dictate how the funds will operate, but the essential thing to keep in mind is that these will be private sector vehicles investing private sector capital in these zones all over the country in any asset, and it's a big opportunity. For those here who believe in this basic hypothesis that we ought to, as an investor community, be spreading our investments to a larger chunk of America, this is the opportunity. You guys are at the front lines of this. This asset class is being created now. We think it will be huge. Think of it as domestic emerging market funds all over this country, investing in communities that haven't gotten this level of capital before. It won't work everywhere. It's not the silver bullet for every community in need, but it should be a huge driver of capital to larger parts of the country. So this is a really brief overview. If folks are really interested and want to dive in, I'll be around. We have a great website at eig.org. You can see every part of the country that is a potential to be an opportunity zone. If you see on this map, all the blue and dark blue areas, those are opportunity zone eligible parts of America. The yellow areas are not. It's a huge swath of the country. If you go to any big city and there's an interactive map on our site, you'll see huge chunks of those cities apply. So if you care about this, I'd talk to your governors. I'd talk to your mayors now. If you want more details on it, feel free to talk to me. Thanks so much.
So another big round of applause for Steve and the work he's done. It's amazing. Good job. Okay, so we're going to shorten lunch just a little bit because we're running behind, but not too much. So be back here at 1 o'clock, and lunch is downstairs, right downstairs, and so we'll see you back at 1 sharp. Thanks. Great. So I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Welcome back. So I think we have a great segue from the last session that you heard. Steve Glickman talked about the opportunity zones, and that actually using the relative stats that he had, either a majority or a vast plurality or a big minority, depending on the stat, of regions are in trouble or struggling or declining as a subset actually rises. And he talked about the health, just simply the health issues, right? You die 4 years earlier, or you have much more chance of diabetes, and so on in these struggling regions. So I had reached out to Esther Dyson about a year ago to talk about the work that she's doing on her project, Wellville. And so I'm really looking forward to a conversation between her and Amy Westerveld right now about her project, Wellville. Welcome, Esther Dyson and Amy. There you go. Yeah. Thank you, Esther.
Thanks.
Hiya.
Hi, this is a big couch.
Yes.
So I was hoping that you could start with, I know that it's been talked about a little bit today, but what you see as the intersection between tech and health in terms of making sure that we have a decent pipeline of talent and making sure that the workforce is stable.
Yeah, so, I mean, honestly, I'm not sure about the connection between tech and health.
Yeah.
I did talk a while ago to a venture capitalist about what we were doing at Wellville, which is fundamentally making people healthy, and I'll get into that more.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Oh, Esther, that's so sweet of you, but 10 years from now, everybody's going to have a Fitbit, and it won't be necessary."
Yeah.
I felt like saying, "Yeah, dude, you should fly commercial more often." So,
Yeah.
I am trying to figure out how to position this for this audience. And fundamentally, when we talk about economic development, we don't say, "Oh, we're preventing poverty."
Mm-hmm.
We say we're building an economy, we're building productivity, we're creating this amazing economic engine. And tell them,
Mm-hmm.
I say, no, actually we're building resilience. We're developing this asset of healthy human bodies and minds that's productive, just in the way economic development is developing economies, companies, employment opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's tougher than it sounds, but from the point of view of a business person or a taxpayer, if we don't have healthy people who come to work almost every day and are resilient and productive, and when they get sick, they get better quickly, and if they have cancer, they have a reasonably good chance of surviving versus if you already have diabetes or COPD or hypertension. Anything that assaults you is going to have a much worse outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's worth investing in health.
And I know that Wellville is working in multiple communities and doing a lot of different things in each of them, but if you can give us a little bit of an overview, and then maybe we can dig into a specific case.
So the first thing is they're communities, they're not cities.
Right.
And originally, back in 2014, we put out a call for applications for communities of under 100,000 people that wanted assistance and coaching for their own coalition, which was going to be the applying body to make their communities healthier. We got 42 applications, to my great delight.
That's great.
And my CEO and I went and visited 10 of them the summer of 2014,
Mm-hmm.
which was an incredible education. So these are mostly godforsaken places with a nice upper middle class that somehow got lucky and had some assets. And this is an overstatement, kind of a lot of low-income people who basically were being beaten down by everything from card payments to being sick to the opioid addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the people dying, it's the people who are living addicted.
Yeah.
and crummy schools and bad food swamps, not food deserts. And the middle class had kind of disappeared. The jobs weren't that good. So, but they wanted to do something about it. And our job was to be an executive coach kind of entity, not a we'll do the work for you and then when our funding runs out, we'll leave.
Yeah. So kind of like teaching them how to apply more business strategy to it?
We don't give you fish.
Right. We teach you to fish.
But we didn't even teach them how to fish. What we're trying to do is to help them build their own fishing schools that will keep turning out great fisher people.
Yeah.
And many of those fisher people will be teachers, nurses, policemen, police people who play ball with the kids instead of putting them in jail. And just, how do we build the fabric of the community? And then if you're an employer and you run a call center, you won't be dealing with these horrible absenteeism rates. And if you're doing something more high tech, there will be kids who made it through school and then college, and they'll be motivated and productive, and it's a place people want to live.
Yeah. So let's dig into one of these communities. And I think since we're on the West Coast, I know you had mentioned working in Lake County,
Right.
Which people here might be familiar with.
Yeah, it's the
is
place
anyone-
beyond Napa Valley.
Wildfires.
You probably stop in Napa Valley when you go north, but
Yeah.
beyond it, there's this wonderful lake. They grow grapes and pears and walnuts and, of course, marijuana. Great population if you want to do indoor gardening. And it's stunningly beautiful, but it's also, they kind of lost a lot of their economic oomph when you could get cheap flights to Hawaii instead of going north to Lake County for summer weekends and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So in Lake County, there was indeed an outfit that was working to improve the health, but it wasn't being very effective. But they did bring us in, and we kind of helped give them advice, and we sort of poked, but again, it's not a nice white lady from New York telling them everything.
Right.
It's, let us help you do what you want to do. And so now there's a new outfit called Hope Rising. The two anchor board members and contributors are the two hospital systems, Adventist and Sutter Health, familiar names down in the valley. And Partnership Health Plan is the Medicaid insurer, Tribal Health, which is with the Native American community. So there's about 67,000 people, maybe 7,000 or 8,000 Native Americans. And you're a fair number of migrant workers and a lot of people who are addicted, many vets,
Yeah.
and a homeless problem. So they're beginning to move from pilot programs and food banks to how can we build something sustainable that will provide employment, that will be lasting, and create enough of a motivated workforce that maybe somebody would come up there and put up a call center, and then someone else will say, boy, there's a lot of artists up here. We could have a design group, and some remote work, some actual local. They should be exporting a lot more produce. The farmland is about a quarter or a tenth the cost in Santa Rosa.
Yeah.
But the reality is the roads up there are fairly constricted. So, but it's stunningly beautiful, and it's beginning to get this sense of community. So Wellville is a 10-year project. It ends in 2024, and the purpose is, so I used to be a journalist, and I think the best way to persuade people is not to lobby them or argue with them, but to just show them. This is what it looks like when you invest in health. And it's going to take a while. And believe me, they won't be done by 2024. But the goal is to show results that you can see without using multiple regression analyses and AI and all this other data mining. But the mayors get reelected. The kids are graduating. The kids who graduate and go to college come back. And just that's what we want to show.
Yeah. Outside of the Lake County example, is there any one particular success that you're proud of?
Well, so we're a team of 6, 5 of us. Each one of us has one of the communities. I've got Muskegon, Michigan. And the thing I'm most excited about is the Diabetes Prevention Program, which is a evidence-based, government-sanctioned, whatever program offered by the YMCA. And so, from my point of view, it's a great vector for if we're successful, the YMCA can spread it. We don't, it's like it's got
Right.
a natural way to scale beyond Muskegon. I went to see the CDC last week to talk with them. So Muskegon, since we got there, they're part of a grant the CDC gave to Trinity Health, which is Muskegon's primary provider, and Trinity is over a lot of the East, and they've got 16 ministries, which is what they call their health systems, doing this. All of them are doing it themselves, except in Muskegon, they're using the YMCA. And this is not simply here's a list of things to eat and go to the gym every morning and you're done. It's really a class where the people come together, work with one another, so it builds up social fabric. It's not just about the physical. And I have to believe that not only will they be eating better and getting physically healthier, but they will be getting mentally healthier. The ones who are parents will be better parents. And the other thing I've learned,
I'll check it.
oh, we're still
Yeah, we're good.
green. Great, we can go on for another half hour.
Yeah.
So we know about addiction, and we know about, eating, like people get sort of addicted to food.
Right. The
And they
sugar thing and all
certainly-
that, yeah.
It's all about short-term thinking versus long-term thinking. And where you learn that short-term thinking is during an insecure childhood. I was trying to explain, just like I'm trying to explain here, to a bunch of AI people, what are you doing? And I said, we're improving the training set for infants and toddlers so that they learn that security. Short-term desire is addiction. It's instant gratification. It's grab the marshmallow because you might not get another marshmallow. Versus long-term thinking, which is purpose and strategy. And whether you're a politician or a business person or a health insurance company or an individual, you need that purpose. You need that sense of agency. If I do things, I'll get results. Versus I'm not even going to try because everything just gets screwed up when I get involved.
Yeah.
People need a feeling of agency, and as parents, they can be better parents and they can pass that along to their kids. And that is going to be hard to see a lot of, even in years.
Right.
But we want to get it started, and I think you will see it in the first. We should have started yesterday, but we're starting today.
Yeah. I think we have time for maybe one question.
It says
If anyone-
2:14, yeah.
If anyone wants to ask anything. Anyone? No? Okay.
Can you talk about the economic development side, which is
Okay.
part of the community building effort?
Yeah, so, well, in 2 ways. One, believe me, all these communities need more jobs. They need good employers. They need employers who offer health insurance and child care and healthy food. But fundamentally, economics is incredibly important because poverty it's inextricably linked in both directions. But second, if we're successful in keeping people healthy, that is an economic asset because then the community spends less on remediation and fixing stuff that's broken, whether it's broken windows by juvenile delinquents or broken bodies because people aren't healthy. And so there is a financial return, not necessarily to whoever invested. This gets much longer term and political. I mean, I do think we should be paying for health just the way we pay for education, because human bodies and minds are a collective asset. But in the short run, we're trying to simulate it in these communities. And we're using small communities because density is really important. If your neighbors are eating healthy or asking the grocery store why they don't have more vegetables, everyone around them benefits. If you try and do this in too large of a place, there's much less impact. But we firmly believe that the economic health of these communities will benefit from physical health and vice versa. But you can't do just one. You need to do all of them, and they need to kind of work together and understand the importance in both directions. But I mean, if you ask me later, I can show you all kinds of studies that show the financial returns. For example, a pre-diabetes class is going to cost about $500, and within 3 or 4 years, you'll save $2,000 or $3,000 per year on the treatment of someone who becomes diabetic and long-term has amputations, renal failure, and again, just worse outcomes from any other health problem.
Awesome. I think, yeah, we're at time, but
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Esther. And thank you, Amy. Just tremendous work you're doing. Fascinating stuff. We look forward to hearing the results in 24 and beyond. Earlier. Okay. So we'll hear something sooner. And we'll stay in touch with Esther and hopefully bring it to you on VentureBeat. The next conversation changes things up. I think it was important to keep it real. There's a good percentage of the communities that are facing those really hard problems. We heard from the big guys already, Walmart, from Bentonville, a company that's not based in Silicon Valley, and a company that's not necessarily considered tech. Now we're going to 2 giant tech companies, one of the 2 of the largest market cap companies on the planet, and they happen to be based in those high-cost, really concentrated tech communities, Silicon Valley, right, Mountain View, and Seattle. So would like to introduce Jesse Haynes, Grow with Google, Kate Benkin, and the head of Microsoft TechSpark Initiative, Jesse Haynes, Grow with Google, and then Kate Benkin, head of Microsoft TechSpark Initiative, and that's moderated by Anna Hensel. And they're going to be talking about what large tech giants are doing to accelerate prosperity in the heartland. Welcome. Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for coming.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Anna.
All right. Yeah, so I'm really excited to have both of your perspectives here. Like Matt said, not being based in these communities that we're focusing on, but you're doing work to help accelerate these communities. So as mentioned, Jesse oversees Grow with Google, Kate oversees Microsoft's TechSpark. Both of these programs are focused on helping communities across the US and various stakeholders within those communities adapt to the changing economy, but in different ways, which we'll get into. So the first thing I wanted to ask you both, when we talk about how big tech companies can invest in these communities across the US, there's tons of different ways you can go about that. So I'd like to hear more, tell the audience what your program focuses on and why you decided to structure it like that. Mm-hmm. So Kate, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks. And firstly, it's a pleasure to be here, Anna, speaking with you and with Jesse. So for us, it really started after the election in 2016, and it became clear that there were people in the US and people who were living outside of the major metropolitan hubs who had a really strong voice and perhaps felt like they were not being heard. It was a real wake-up call. People who felt like they weren't getting the same opportunity as people that do live in the major metropolitan hubs. And if you overlay that with the growing sentiment at the time that many of us heard, that the tech sector had not only been insensitive to the problem, but we'd been contributing to it. And a growing sense that we've heard about this morning that AI was, maybe going to automate people's jobs out of existence. And we thought about all of that against the mission of Microsoft, which is to empower every person and organization on the planet. And we felt like we had a responsibility to try and address these issues. And so we architected the Microsoft TechSpark program. So it's an initiative, we launched it in October last year, and it's an initiative all about fostering the economy, the local economy, and job creation in 6 regions. And we're doing that by working very closely with the local communities and partnering with local partners through 5 key pillars: bringing broadband access to more people, bringing digital skills and computer science education to more kids. We're thinking about career pathways efforts. So how can we help people translate the skills that they have today into the jobs of tomorrow? Continuing to partner with nonprofits, and then also we're really interested in digital transformation initiatives. So working with both startups and existing companies on their digital transformation journey.
Yeah, and so before we get to you, Jesse, I think it's interesting to note both of these programs were started in October. So first of all, if there's any secret communication going on between Google and Microsoft, VentureBee wants to know about it. But I'd like to hear more, what prompted Google to start Grow with Google? Was it some of the same sentiments that Kate mentioned?
Sure. And first of all, thank you so much for having us here today. It's great to be talking about this. So yeah, very similar to Kate's story about Microsoft. I think at Google, we've always believed that technology can be this powerful force that can help people grow and learn and succeed. And I think we also recognize that we're in this time of when technology is sort of bringing profound technological change and economic change. And we wanted to make sure that the opportunities that technology is bringing were getting to everybody. And so we started Grow with Google. It is an initiative that brings free tools and training and events to Americans all across the country. We've got a bunch of different programs within Grow, and the way that we like to think of them is as programs that can help you prepare for work, find work, or grow your business. And we can talk a little bit more about some of the specifics, but it's really about opportunity for everyone. That's at the heart of it.
Yeah. So first, I'd like to get back to Kate for a second. As you mentioned, what's interesting about Microsoft TechSpark is you are investing in these 5 pillars you mentioned: rural broadband, career pathways, but you're only focusing on 6 communities. So why did you decide to focus only on those 6, and why did you choose some of the ones you did?
We felt like we had the best opportunity to learn the most if we actually focused on a small number of communities. So we chose 6. We didn't want to peanut butter our approach initially because we have a lot to learn. We chose the locations for very different reasons actually. In 4 of the locations we have a Microsoft presence. So in Washington, Wyoming, and Wisconsin we have a data center presence, and so we wanted to build on that. And likewise in Fargo, North Dakota, we've actually got a pretty sizable presence there with the inside sales team. We have about 900 FTEs. So we wanted to build on that. In Wisconsin, it was really different. Wisconsin, the ecosystem seemed really ripe for what we wanted to do with TechSpark. There were industries that are really ripe for innovation, really strong collaboration between academic institutions and local business. And we also had the beginnings of some strong local partnerships that we wanted to build on. And for the 6th state, we chose Texas, and in part because of the large Hispanic population, and we felt like we had an opportunity to learn about how we may need to adapt our programs. And we're also interested in learning more about Fort Bliss from a career pathways perspective. It's one of the largest military bases in the US.
Yeah, so since both of your programs are focused on job skills that you'll need for people to really have a career pathway and succeed in this changing economy, what skills specifically are you focused on helping train people to obtain?
So we're focused on a range. I'll just give you a couple of examples. One thing that we know is critically important are just digital basics, digital literacy. Every job today requires some form of digital literacy, and kids are graduating from college, from high school without that. So we have a program called Applied Digital Skills, which we piloted last school year and rolled out at the beginning of this school year. We built it in conjunction with a couple of hundred teachers across 38 different states. It's earned the ISTE seal of alignment and has also been aligned with state standards. And the basic premise behind Applied Digital Skills is digital literacy through project-based learning. So it's a video-based curriculum. It's available online for free. Now that we've launched it, it's being used by thousands of teachers in every state in the United States. And you learn how to use spreadsheets and how to make presentations by doing stuff that's also teaching you life skills. So one of my favorite units is the unit where you have to research a cell phone plan. And that's pretty interesting to high school kids these days. And in the process of doing that, you learn about spreadsheets and budgeting and all this other stuff. And so that's one really important area that we've been focused on.
Yeah, as an aside, Mark Murrow, who was up here earlier, that's something that we've talked about, and there's an article up on VentureBeat if anyone wants to go read it. But his research into the digitalization of jobs, he has found that especially, really every job is becoming a digital job, but it's not necessarily that learning to code is important, but also that students need to know how to use these basics like Microsoft Excel and Slack to really succeed in those jobs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And if I could just add to that, I mean, for our digital skills and computer science education pillar, similar to what Jessie said, we're really focused on expanding actually what's been our signature program for many years, TEALS, Technology Education and Literacy Skills Program, kind of rolls off the tongue. Mm-hmm. But the way that works is it's really about bringing in a computer science teacher who will team teach with a maths or a science teacher, currently in the school, and over time, they will learn to be the computer science teacher. Because what we're finding is many of these, high schools, they want to offer computer science education to their kids, but they just don't currently have the resources to do it. So TEALS is currently in 348 schools in the US, and I think there's 1,100 volunteers from over 500 companies, and has currently reached 37,000 students. So with TechSpark, we are asking the TEALS sits in the Microsoft Philanthropies team, and we're really asking them to focus some of their efforts specifically on these 6 locations.
Yeah. And then another aspect when we talk about tech education is postgraduate or technical education. So Jessie with Grow with Google, you guys in January, I believe, launched a IT certificate course on Coursera, so training people to become entry-level IT support roles. So can you talk a little bit about that program and what kind of interest you've seen in it so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Google, we actually had a problem, which is that we couldn't find talent to fill our own IT pipeline. So the folks that worked at TechStop, which is what we refer to as our help desks, said, I think we're going about this the wrong way. And we had some hunches that maybe IT support wasn't something that you needed a 4-year college degree for. And so we ran a pilot in partnership with a nonprofit called Year Up within Google to see if we could bring non-traditional talent into Google through our IT residency program, and working with Year Up through a series of internships and scholarship programs. And we learned that IT is very teachable, and that indeed you do not need a 4-year college degree to succeed in this field. And so we took the training course that we had piloted with Year Up and built it out and launched it in January on Coursera. It's an 8 to 12-month course that takes you from beginner to entry-level job ready in that time period. And we have seen an overwhelming response. There's almost 20,000 folks have enrolled. It was, I think, the largest first-day launch Coursera has ever seen on their platform. And what we're really excited about is that there's this curriculum out there, but we've also been talking to a lot of other big companies, because Google's not the only one that needs great IT talent. Everybody does this these days. So we have built a hiring consortium that includes Walmart. I don't know if the Walmart folks are still here, Bank of America, PNC Bank, and a bunch of other companies. Kate will be talking to you later about joining the consortium. And the folks that complete the program can opt to have their information shared with these companies who are looking for great IT talent. So there's that pathway to jobs there, which is obviously so important. So we're very excited about what we've seen from the IT cert so far.
And then Kate, with Microsoft, are there any skills specifically you're looking at as really ripe for this pathway approach?
Not so much. It's probably a little bit different in that we're not looking at this initiative sort of for Microsoft roles. We're really looking at how we can help spark jobs in these communities and across different industries. It really depends. In each of the 6 locations, there's such different industries, and they're also very different. We have from 500 people in Boynton, Virginia, to almost 1 million in El Paso, and sort of everything in between. So we've just hired somebody to lead the Career Pathways program, and so he's very focused on learning a lot more about these communities and what's needed.
Yeah, important programs. And then Jesse, Grow with Google, is also visiting different cities across the country, hours, less than that.
Heading to Lansing.
So I'm curious, what kind of reaction have you gotten from these different communities you visited? There has been talk of this big tech backlash. Have you seen that in the cities that you visited?
We have the Grow with Google tour, which really is our chance to bring the Grow with Google programs to local communities, introduce them to community organizations, to reach job seekers, teachers, and small businesses. And we've been warmly embraced by the communities that we've gone into. They're excited to learn about with a listening ear, and really tried to go to places that are excited for Google to be there, and really have an appetite for these sorts of programs. We're really excited to be coming to Lansing. We're partnering with like 20-something community organizations. So I think we haven't experienced, we're reading about it in the papers for sure, but and experiencing it in other ways, but we've been warmly welcomed in the communities that we've taken the Grow with Google tour to.
Yeah.
I would second that as well from the Microsoft TechSpark perspective. One of the early learnings we had actually was just the reaction that we had from our own employee base. We had so many people reaching out to us asking how they could help with these initiatives, but then externally as well. And what we did straight off the bat, we thought it was really important to have a local community engagement manager hired in each of the 6 locations. So someone who was already really well connected with key stakeholders to sort of be our ambassador for the Microsoft TechSpark program, and be the eyes and ears on the ground, to provide us with fast feedback about what are the local issues and what's working and what isn't working, and what programs would actually have the most impact in those locations. So it's been a great reception so far.
Yeah. And in the communities you two have visited, given that you both live on the coast, I'm curious, what has stood out to you about some of the communities you visited? Any ones where there was like a stronger tech community, or they kind of had more progress than you were expecting?
I will call out Wisconsin. There's actually many examples, but I'll call out Wisconsin. They have a really particularly innovative ecosystem, and that really struck us. And one of the things that we've done there is our signature project in Wisconsin. We have entered into a partnership with the Green Bay Packers. I was saying earlier that we want to have local partnerships, and we felt like in that region, you couldn't get a better partner than the Green Bay Packers. So we've invested $5 million, as have they, to create a technology and innovation center. And what we want to do with that, this really firmly aligns with the digital transformation pillar. We want to work with new companies, startups, as they're growing their business, but also existing companies. So companies that might be in traditional lines of business that are interested in undergoing, their own digital transformation, and helping think about what kind of program would help them in their journey. So I think to answer your question, what really struck us as we were, looking at all of that was people understand digital transformation really differently, and companies understand that really differently. So there's companies that really think about digital transformation as how do they move from a more manual processes to really sort of digitization of those processes, all the way up to companies that are thinking about how can they use technology in new and different ways to grow a whole new line of business, to hopefully grow revenue with hopefully then they can open up new jobs. And what we really hope is that because of some of these other initiatives, they'll be able to hire locally. There will be people with the skills locally for these new jobs.
Yeah. And then Jesse, what stood out to you about some of the communities you visited?
Yeah, it's been so fun to go and meet so many people. One of my favorite stories was when we went to Indianapolis with Grow with Google. We met a teacher who had driven 2 hours from a rural town in Indiana to come to the Grow with Google event. She'd heard about it, and she was already using Applied Digital Skills, that program, that curriculum that I was talking about earlier. And she stood at the Applied Digital Skills table in the Expo Center and was fielding questions and talking to other teachers. And at one point, she just jumped behind the table and just basically stayed there all day, offering advice and tips. And then I think at one point we sort of brought her up on stage during one of the workshops. But it was amazing. Like, these programs are getting traction and people are excited to talk about them and share with them. Another interesting example is in Pittsburgh. We come at the Grow with Google event, but that's really just the beginning of our engagement in these cities. And in Pittsburgh, we've recently completed the Google Impact Challenge, where we put out a call to the community to say, bring us your innovative ideas for generating economic opportunity, and we'll fund them. And so we picked four finalists who are going to get $50,000 grants from Google.org, and then the community gets to vote on of those four, which one gets an additional $50,000. And the ideas that are coming in are so amazing and so inspiring. I think that we're just seeing creativity and ingenuity and energy in these places.
So now, given that these programs are pretty new, how are you guys looking to measure progress that's made, how successful your efforts are in really helping communities and job seekers prepare for the digital economy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've talked a lot about how we're going to measure impact, and because this is a new initiative, I would say for the first year we'll be measuring activity. So if you think about digital skills and computer science education, we will be more focused on how many high schools have we been able to bring TEALS to. If you take something like rural broadband, how many people have we been able to bring broadband access to? And likewise for digital transformation, how many companies have we been able to work with? But I would say after about a year, we want to quickly pivot and get a lot crisper with our KPIs. So, for digital skills and computer science education, it might be how many kids had access to computer science education, but then how many went on to do the AP course?
Right.
And how did that kind of change their trajectory and what they studied and what opportunities opened up for them? If you think about broadband, it's how many people might now have access to broadband, but what did they do with it? How were they able to take advantage of educational opportunities or healthcare opportunities? And then for digital transformation, it's if a company's gone through a digital transformation effort, have they been able to grow their business, and have they been able to open up more jobs, and have they been able to hire those jobs locally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're thinking about it in the same way. Right now we want to make sure that we're getting these programs and products into the hands of as many people as possible. And we're laying the sort of these output metrics, activity metrics that Kate mentioned, but we're laying the groundwork are now in an IT job. How many of the folks that take Applied Digital Skills are feeling more confident in technology? How many small businesses are actually growing because they got online? So there's a whole range of impact metrics that we're really focused on.
And then the last question for you guys before we get to a few questions. We have people here who represent communities all over the U.S. Is there any way they can get involved with your programs?
Absolutely. I mean, initially we're very, very focused on these 6 states and these particular regions in the 6 states. So if anybody here is we're in Washington, Wyoming, Wisconsin, North Dakota, Texas, and I'm missing one, Wisconsin. Did I say Wisconsin? So I'll be around for the rest of this conference if anybody would like to talk further.
Yeah, we'd love to talk to anyone. I would love to talk to you about Grow with Google. All of our Grow with Google programs are on google.com/grow. They're all there. They're all free, so you can go and explore. And then we obviously are very interested in bringing this Grow with Google tour to more communities across the country over the course of the next year. So we'd love to talk to you about coming to your town.
Yeah. So I got the cutoff signal for Matt. So if you guys have any questions, you'll still be around for a little bit more.
We will.
So yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Sounded good up there, yeah. Not in the back. So without further ado, let's go to the next session, which is our first full panel, and introduces some people that we haven't heard from yet. Another constituency, which is the service providers that are actually helping companies think through reorganization. Some of these large companies, or growth companies. So it's not just in fact, most often it's not the biggest companies. It's the second tier. The Zendesks, the DocuSigns, some of these others that are emerging, the Eventbrites behind the big companies that are looking to grow and efficiently. And so we have Mark Ortung, the CEO of Nexient, and Stefan Kazriel, CEO of Upwork, representing those 2 service providers. And then to keep it real, we have Patrick Poles, the VP of Engineering at Eventbrite. So we actually have a company that's working on this expansion. And then finally, Matt Dunn, who was a Googler, now is the founder and executive director at Center on Rural Innovation. And moderating them is Chris Shipley, author and tech advisor. So please welcome this lady and gentleman. Thank you.
So I understand that I'm the reason Stefan can be on this panel, because you will only sit on panels where there's also a woman, so I'm glad to fill that role. And thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time with introductions, because we have now 19 minutes and 41 seconds. And we really want to talk about a lot in a very short period of time. So we're just going to jump right in. And gentlemen, I'll let you fill in any backstory you feel might be necessary as you talk about things. But Pat, I'm going to start with you, because we were talking the other night on the phone about how you are using locations outside of Silicon Valley to create really strong engineering groups and the advantages you're finding. And I think that's a great model. Why don't we start there?
Yeah, definitely. So at Eventbrite, we've grown from, when I started there 6 years ago, from 45 engineers up to 200. And we haven't just done that in San Francisco. When I started, we were all in San Francisco, but we've been able to extend outside of the Bay Area, knowing that there's a lot of really great engineers around the country and around the world. And one of the places we've been very, very successful has been Nashville. Kind of the biggest reason that we've been able to grow into 30 engineers there has been some great leadership on that team, some great help from people like Launch Tennessee, who you heard from earlier today. But the biggest advantage we have there is not just great people who fit our culture, but also that the turnover rate in Nashville is just so much lower. So we're finding that the people that we hire are in the organization longer, they're learning to be better and better, know our business better, and they're with us for longer.
You said something that I thought was really important, and I think sometimes we think about these sort of outside campuses or distant campuses as sort of, it's a support role, or it's a QA role, or it's something, and you said these are not just JV projects. Your engineers are really integral there, your Nashville, and to the work that's happening in the Valley. How do you keep that integral relationship really strong So because I think that's the management issue becomes really challenging for a lot of these.
Yeah, you have to build up enough trust to be able to give them the really meaty projects and to give them autonomy to work on those things, really kind of self-driven in ways where you can. And it takes investment. You can't just decide you're going to build a team and then leave it alone and it's going to function completely on its own. You have to spend a lot of time, having people both places, traveling back and forth from Nashville to San Francisco, investing time in the leadership and making sure that they understand the mission and what we're doing as a company. But I find that the investment's well worth it because we're getting a ton of great support out of Nashville.
Great. Mark, you were talking about the groups that you have in Michigan and Indiana and how that has been an advantage for you in some of your actually client work, client outreach, and how it's changed the nature of some of those client relationships versus, say, full offshoring to India or somewhere else to build an engineering team.
Yeah, let me just quick context. We do software development for Fortune 500 companies and for tech companies, and all of our engineers are either in Michigan or in Indiana, and we're based in Silicon Valley. And some of the advantages we've seen, I'd name a few. Number one, access to talent. Right, so if you've been in either in Manhattan or on the West Coast, you know how hard that is to get. We were able to develop talent as well as attract talent to Ann Arbor in particular, and that's been a great asset for us. The other thing I'd say we've been able to do, being in the U.S., being in a similar time zone, and having the cultural context of our clients, is build what we call a product mindset. So it's a way to take a lot of what the tech companies have done well and apply it to the customer-facing part of Fortune 500 companies. So that for us has been another asset of having people in Michigan and Indiana.
Cool. Matt, I'm going to come to you and ask you to give us a little bit more backstory on what you're doing with the Center for Rural Innovation. I think that's sort of the pipeline for a lot of this engineering talent, if I understand it.
Well, there's a huge opportunity there. So I grew up in rural Vermont and actually in the 90s helped to grow a Vermont-based software company in places where you weren't supposed to. And then eventually I was recruited by Google to be the head of community affairs. And they asked me how soon I could move to Mountain View. And I said, never. And so they actually...
I already have a Mountain View.
Exactly.
Thank you. It's a white Mountain View.
Exactly. And so we actually opened an office in White River Junction, Vermont, and I was able to run a completely distributed team for Google for 8.5 years from there. And so as I was trying to figure out what the next step was, my real passion was about creating opportunity in rural communities. And so with the help of Reid Hoffman and some others, got off the ground an organization to build digital ecosystems within rural communities. So focusing on communities between 8,000 and 20,000 people. Rural communities represent about 75% of the land mass of the United States. And there's amazing, beautiful small towns. And so what we've done is a lot of data aggregation. We specifically are looking for communities that are in that size but have banded together to bring gigabit speed internet to their community. And there are dozens and dozens of them around the country that haven't really been talked about, that they're within a 30-mile distance of a major university campus or an endowed four-year residential college, and they have an authentic downtown. And so we're building these ecosystems in actual places and spaces with an eye towards remote work. So we are doing the entrepreneurship side with an idea that the entrepreneur will not have access to their whole team immediately, that they'll be thinking about collaboration across distance right out of the gate, and we're looking to train people who will have digital jobs already lined up, but doing it remotely. And again, bringing that specific kind of soft skills training to be very good at that kind of remote work. So that's what we're doing. We have a pilot we're standing up. We've got another one in the pipeline, but more importantly, aggregating that data so that investors and tech companies and others can see the incredible opportunity there is across the country in rural communities.
Is that pilot in a specific community?
Yeah, so we've got, our pilot is in Springfield, Vermont, which is your classic post-industrial rural area that had the highest per capita income in the state for 40 years, and now 30% of the community is on public assistance. But it has a gigabit connection, in fact, 10 gigabit connection to the home for cheaper than Google Fiber, and amazing buildings, and it's 30 miles away from Dartmouth College. And so we're finding really interesting collaborative partners. Our next stop is probably in Iowa, given the interest that we have seen. But we've actually been having small communities that fit that profile now coming to us, very excited, sharing their visions for how they can do that, but really show that there's interest, and we're now working a lot on the demand side with progressive thinking companies that would be excited to work with us, hiring talent in these locations.
Okay, that's fantastic work. Thank you for doing it. I think it's also a good segue to you, Stefan, because you talk about, and I want you to kind of break some of the myths that I think we can have about rural communities or distant workers, that maybe they're not, if they were world class, they'd be in Silicon Valley. You're finding something very different.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been going on for a while. The talent is just much more distributed than job opportunities. There's lots of really good research universities throughout the country, and a lot of the people that graduate from those universities stay local. In fact, geographic mobility in the US is trending down, not up, right? People tend to be less and less inclined to move to San Francisco and move to New York for pretty obvious reasons. Rents in San Francisco have been going up by 7% per year for the last 45 years. You compound it, it's pretty brutal. The average household income to afford a median-priced house in San Francisco right now is $315,000, which even if it's two Silicon Valley-based software developers, which is kind of a best-case scenario, you can barely make it, right? And so fundamentally, what's been driving a huge increase in these distributed, remote-first type of companies is the fact that capital still tends to be mainly happening in San Francisco, New York, and a few other big tech centers, but the companies are really struggling to find the talent locally. And what's really driving this is not even the companies realizing that they need to do this as much as the fact that the talent is just doing it in troves. When I look at our site as an example, on any given day, there's about 2,000 companies that sign up to buy services from freelancers. There's over 10,000 people that sign up to be freelancers on the platform, right? So there's literally a 5-to-1 ratio, and that's what's driving the big shift. Is companies are realizing the traditional talent war, the local hiring where you poach from your competitor who then poaches back from you, is a zero-sum game at best. And if you really want to move past that and actually create value, for your shareholders, not even for society, you need to go hire people remotely. I would say beyond that, there's an increasing realization, at least in Silicon Valley, that we have been one of the sources of the problems. When we increase productivity through tech, we destroy jobs, we create jobs, but the jobs we create are different from the jobs we destroy. The skills are different, which was the whole discussion from Google and Microsoft about teaching digital skills. But the geography is also very different. And the old paradigm of the first industrial revolution, which is you move the worker to where the work is, has come to a dead end, right? And the new paradigm needs to be the opposite, which is you train people in their local communities, and then you allow them to work from wherever it is that they want to live, which ends up being better for the company, better for the workers, and frankly, probably a much better outcome for society. And by the way, we're talking about the US here, but the same thing is happening in most of the Western world and definitely in Europe.
So let's talk about some of the ways, dig down a little bit more deeply in the ways that this is good for the company, right? Because I think while we can sort of say this, yes, we know it's going to be cheaper, but it's going to be a management problem, or it's going to be a culture problem with our organization. How are you finding that you're able to manage these remote teams or integrate your remote teams in a way that creates an ecosystem, a geographic ecosystem for your companies, and really get greater benefit from that? And I'll throw that to anyone who wants to jump on that one.
I'm happy to answer, and I'm sure other people can chime in, but I would say it's a management skill that you can acquire just like any other management skills. Unfortunately, it's not particularly well taught in engineering schools or business schools, and I'm hoping that if there are educators in this room that you consider it. But it's not any different from managing a local team. There are best practices out there. You check in with people regularly, you involve them. In fact, you go out of your way to not have the water cooler discussion where people that are in the office have an unfair communication and information advantage over the people that are remote. So there's a few best practices. We've written a lot about this. Other remote-first companies, I think Atlassian has written a lot about it. Trello, before they got acquired by Atlassian, wrote a lot. GitHub. There's Basecamp. There's a pretty large number of fairly big remote-first companies that have been documenting the tools they use, the processes they use, the culture they want to put into place. And I would just say, like, probably the most important thing is realizing that the first remote person that you hire is going to be at a huge competitive disadvantage if you already have a large established team. So you need to really go out of your way to make them feel included and to start staffing up more than one person. Because if you have 100 local people and one remote, it's almost bound that the person who's remote is going to fail, which is going to make you feel like, see, I told you this was never going to work, right? And you need to shift from 100% local to something around 70% local, 30% remote, and then progressively to 50-50 if you really want to give this a chance.
Pat, you clearly are doing something right with your retention rates in Nashville. What are you learning, and how does that translate into benefit for the company?
Yeah, well, I feel like it's in responding to what Stefan said. I think if you know what your culture is and you know what your mission is, and it's a very strong mission, like for Eventbrite, we're bringing people together around live experiences. And I think that because we know what that is and because we know who we are, it helps us to be able to try and find people who that mission actually resonates for them. It makes it a lot easier, I think, to have people who are really tied to what we're doing as a company. And I think that it's not probably surprising that Nashville was the place that we decided to go, given that we're an events company and it's such a big music culture in that city. It was a place that really kind of fit who we were. That's been part of the thing that's helped us, I think, to be successful in retaining those engineers.
I'd add one other thing to it. Just, our experience is we're actually adding entire teams. So we have sort of teams on tap. So to your point, right from the beginning, we have half the team is remote, right? And so it immediately gives you this dynamic. And we've built up a lot of experience over time on the tools. The tools today are fantastic for sharing screens, using Slack, doing video stand-ups, all the various ceremonies around moving quickly can be done very easily remotely now. The one thing I'd say we've discovered is that you can collaborate across anything but time zones. It's very difficult to collaborate if one team wants to be asleep when the other team wants to be awake. That's one. So being in a...
Fortunately, you're a startup where no one sleeps, so that's good.
It's just a coffee problem. I mean, there's ways to solve for that. I mean, it's interesting. One of the things that we're diving into is the importance of actually creating remote spaces that still have a sense of community. So co-work spaces with an intentionality to them can help replace some of that culture and structure, particularly for people who aren't in leadership positions, which a lot of remote workers are. There's an engineer lead that works out of a co-work space in Burlington, Vermont for Google. And I'm not sure his team knows, well, they know that. But anyway, it's working well, and he talks about how having a place to go and to not be in isolation, but still be the only person working for a company can be very effective. You just need to be thoughtful about it, and again, a lot of what we're doing is trying to de-risk it for employers who aren't quite as forward-thinking in how this can work, to help them understand how to do it well and to create a place where success is going to be much more likely.
The term ecosystem gets thrown around a lot, and often it seems to me it's sort of, well, we need a tech ecosystem, so we need one of these and one of these and one of these, and then we'll have one. It also seems to me that if you kind of lift up a little bit, your companies as a whole become ecosystems. But I'm curious, as you were selecting either the region to do your prototype or the places where you've built offices, remote offices, how important is a pre-existing ecosystem, by however you define it, to ensuring the success of the project?
I think it's critical. We've definitely found that in Nashville, there's a very, very tight unit ecosystem of engineers there, and they talk a lot. They get together in meetups in different ways pretty often, and I think that if you have people who can plug into that and are plugged into that, it makes it a whole lot easier in order to build a team. I think a lot of our growth and expansion in Nashville has come from the fact that it's such a tight group there, and we were lucky to hire a great leader who's been a part of that group for a very long time, and that's really helped us accelerate.
For us as well, it was critical when we looked at where to develop our centers. We had to have a certain pool of talent that we could grow, because we're trying to scale a fairly large operation. So for us, it's not as easy to go into a very rural, smaller community. We talk about sort of tier 2 communities, and for us in Ann Arbor, for example, we can attract from the whole Detroit metro area. There's 1.5 million people. We can pull in more experienced people if we need to add to our team. So for us, that whole ecosystem of talent, the universities, the education system, all being in place was really critical.
And our mission as a nonprofit is actually to try to build ecosystems where one don't currently exist, But all the elements are there. I mean, when we were building out our data center in Lenore, North Carolina, I launched apparently the first local recruiting campaign in Google's history, and they thought I was crazy, and they were saying, newspaper ads, really? Are we doing that? And we found extraordinary hardware operation folks in the hills of Western North Carolina. And they didn't have a traditional degree. Some of them had 2 associate's degrees from a tech college nearby, but they could unpack a kernel faster than anyone at the company. And so we believe that those folks are out there. You just have to be intentional in creating a structure to aggregate them so that companies can see that. And then we also think that in isolation, these things aren't going to work. So we believe it's only going to work when we get to 6, 12 of these, because then you'll have the critical mass across the network of both digital talent, skilled workers, as well as entrepreneurial startups.
And I think I would second what you just said. Like, the talent is definitely there, right? There are highly skilled just about everything you can think of in just about every place in the US. There are places where it's harder to work remotely. Like, if you don't have good broadband, if you don't have like kind of a social tissue of co-working spaces or like-minded people that, you know, like working from home entirely can feel really, really lonely, right? So there's some pre-existing conditions for people to be successful. The talent is there. What needs to change, and is changing right now, is how companies engage with the talent, right? I mean, the very traditional tech company would put everybody in one building, let's hash it out together and move really quickly, and of course that doesn't scale. And then the next generation of it typically will say, okay, we'll go open up a second office in Nashville. But typically what happens over time is somebody who was in San Francisco moved to Montana. You know, somebody else moved to Wisconsin. What are you going to do, like fire them? Like, they were your best people. Like, of course you should let them work. And so progressively you go from 1 location to 2 to 5 to the point where you just say, you know what, it's fine. As long as we find great talent, people that are exceptionally good at what they do, incredibly committed to the company, and have the right infrastructure to be successful, and we do, you know, social meetups from time to time within the US, we'll be successful and we'll have, you know, much better outcome for the company. And that's something that is, I would say, has been happening over the last 5 years and wasn't happening before.
Right. Well, and it sounds like we really have to kind of break old modes and mental models about both geography, but also what tasks are and what skills and skills training mean. And as you said, you found amazing engineers by just thinking a little bit differently about that. And it also, to your point, the programs like Grow with Google that provide this coding training are critically important, and yet there's all these other skills like being, what does it mean to be a remote worker? How do I stay connected to the company? How do I manage remote workers? And that those kinds of what we might think of as softer skills are also critically important to begin to cultivate. We have 1 second. No, we don't. We've just hit the mark perfectly. But I want to thank the 4 of you for not just speaking today, but for the work you're doing. Because I think that setting these anchor points and beginning to create that node and network is critically important to, you'll call it the heartland. I just call it America. And I'm really glad to see that you're doing the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Come over here to the microphone. So you heard from the 4 gentlemen who are going to be leading sessions in the breakouts. There's 2 more that I wanted to introduce. So you heard potentially, hopefully, enough from them to get a sense of their point of view. So Nexient and Matt Dunn on the rural side, and Upwork and Eventbrite. But we have two other individuals up there, and I just want to read a brief blurb. So John Fillmore is the Chief Business Officer for Chegg, and he's going to be talking with his experience from Chegg, which has taken, it's an ed tech company, for those of you who are not familiar with it, serving over 4 million customers in 2017, mostly in the US college market. It's bringing its services directly to students, which include online tutoring, homework help, citations, essay and writing support, and textbook rentals. Chegg is now working to help its students make the transition to their careers from learning to earning, and to help address the major gaps we have in student outcomes, with nearly 50% of college students failing to graduate and over 50% of graduates being underemployed. So he's going to focus his panel on the question of what role education plays in helping to shape alternative workforce models, and more generally in helping ensure the regions and companies seeking to expand their digital future have access to the workforce needed. And then the other gentleman who's not on that slide is Skip, who is on that slide, but who you didn't hear from, is Skip Newberry. And he's there. He's leading the Association of Oregon. He's going to be in the Nevada room, and he's focused on workforce development. So the brief blurb there is: communities seeking to retain and attract tech talent must evolve their approach to workforce development, from federally funded tech apprenticeship programs to online and in-person coding and entrepreneurship boot camps. Attend this session to discuss the pros and cons of alternative models designed to address the workforce challenges of the fast-growing tech industry. By the end of this session, participants will create a blueprint of different approaches to workforce development and recruitment for communities in the heartland. Right? So I just wanted to take this moment to remind you that we want to hear from all of you in these sessions, contribute to these conversations in the breakouts. So we're going to break now, and a reminder, to think of a commitment that you want to make if you're a region, or for a company, make your ask. What are you looking for when you're trying to expand, or if you're whatever your interest, please make yourself heard. Thank you very much, and we'll break until when? 2:55. Be back here. Thank you.